another episode of the Hamster Factor. I am AJ Mass, once again here with my partner in crime, Mike Bloom. And this week we are flashing back to a time that was so much simpler, a time where technology ruled everybody's lives, a time when people were just staring into their devices and not paying any attention to the people around them. Wait, that sounds a little too familiar. Hey Mike, how's it going?
Cello, AJ.
Oh, cello, Mr. Mike.
Just don't call me a mook and we'll be fine.
Yeah, so we're getting into the world of Electric Dreams. Really a feel-good film of 1984. I think it's certainly, this is after the last few weeks of some really dark subject matter. I think we needed a little lightheartedness, and so I'm very glad that this was the movie that we selected for this week, because Electric Dreams is, as it says in its opening chyron, it is a fairy tale for computers, and it's a once upon a time kind of story. And unlike the TV show, which I know you're very familiar with, when a story starts with once upon a time, there's usually and they lived happily ever after.
Yeah, well, also like the show Once Upon a Time, there are a lot of soapy love triangle-esque situations, so it's not too distant from the premise here. Is there a term that we can use for a dual chyron? Because that's kind of what that was at the beginning. It was a weird, almost like the beginnings of instant messaging text conversations between two different parties.
Yeah, it was a Byron, maybe?
Yes. Byron, is that how how Edgar would pronounce the name Byron?
Perhaps. Yeah, I mean, I thought, I haven't seen this movie for a long time. It was on cable constantly in the late 80s, and I always kept it on when it came on. It was just one of those films that, there's enough charm to it that once you put it on and you're watching it, if you're in the right headspace, it's charming. What can I say? Charming is the word I'm going to keep saying, because it's just a charming film as far as I'm concerned. But it's definitely of an era and of a time. And yet it's eerily prescient in some of the lack of technology and sparseness of the technology they're using. It very much mirrors what's going on today. They just didn't know it.
Well, I think that's the point, though, right? Is that the content of the film, and obviously the main concept of the film, of this sort of omniscient computer that eventually becomes sentient, I think that's sort of in the beginning of the 1980s what they thought the distant future was going to be. It turns out the distant future was the not so distant future, and now we have things like smart houses where you can have sort of an all-in-one computer through the cloud, run everything, and apps to, watch cameras outside your door when you're not home. So I think there were obviously a lot of aspects that carry into what we do with technology today, and maybe how people utilize technology to connect with people or disconnect with people in some cases. But I think that's kind of the point that they're saying, I don't think they were trying to make it an allegory of this could happen to you, but they surprisingly were not too far off in predicting what technology could do only over the course of 30 years or so. Yeah,
I mean, the alternate title for this film could, in some ways, be Catfish. I mean, we have here a kind of a Cyrano kind of situation where, our main character, Miles, is fallen for his new neighbor, and it takes this other persona, this obviously it's a sentient computer and not like just a Facebook profile, but in essence, she falls in love with this other version of who she thinks Miles is, who isn't who he is at all.
Yeah, it's a weird combination of like Cyrano de Bergerac and almost elements of Little Shop of Horrors near the end. And I was really trying to 80s movies like to provide a lot of conventions in terms of stories that we know and love. I mean, that's what made a show like Stranger Things such a big hit nowadays, or, relying on those nostalgic conventions. And I was totally waiting, once we found out that the computer was going to be an all-in-one security system, I was waiting for that to come up. Once we saw the computer starting to really sing to Madeline in a way, I thought that was going to come up as well. So there were some elements of other stories that were tied in here, but I guess if I could compare it to another film that we talked about, like April Fool's Day, which sort of, as we talked about on our podcast, aimed to use conventions and kind of miss the mark, in our opinion, I enjoyed this film for what it was. That being said, it was a big old hard drive of weirdness, but at least what it was attempting to do and the feelings it was attempting to produce in its audience were at least somewhat achieved as compared to April Fool's Day, which I felt hit a zero batting average, if you will, to coin a phrase that you use in your daily life.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think the thing that is at the heart of this film is that it's a love story between Miles and Madeline, and in order for this film to work, you have to buy that he would fall for her. It's Virginia Madsen, yeah. And that she would fall for him, and yeah, he's charming in his kind of awkwardness, and certainly given that what we know about her, that she's a concert cellist and she's way into music, and so when she hears him playing music, or who she thinks is him playing music, you get why she would be interested in learning more about him, and so the relationship works, and because the relationship works, the movie works.
What do you think a modern day remake of this would entail? Would it be like a computer producing like auto-tuned voices? Because I guess Edgar benefits from this time being the 80s, where electronic music and synthesizers were in. I mean, the soundtrack is an entirely different thing, almost separate from the film. The first like 10 minutes of the movie, the soundtrack doesn't shut up. There's not a moment of quiet until we get Madeline actually starting to play the cello, and that's when Edgar comes in, as you first mentioned. But the music is obviously a key theme in this movie, and admittedly, this movie is not too deep. I think you even warned me about that before on the end of our last podcast. I think in an interview with the director, Steve Barron, he says, this film isn't that deep. The closest parallel is probably that it's Cyrano de Bergerac-like exploration of how words and music can help nurture and grow feelings on the path to love. Oops, that's too deep. He literally finished an interview with saying, nope, I should not be reading too far into this. So that might probably be the most we actually read into this film. There are some interesting shots, once Edgar becomes more of a threat. There is that sort of overhead shot where there are two big overhead lamps that kind of serve as eyes to the giant face that Edgar has now been taking over Miles' apartment. But otherwise, this just seems like, I guess I'd say feel good. Yeah, like you mentioned before. I mean, there is a happy ending. There is a love story. There is sort of what you might consider a tear-jerking moment at the end when Edgar decides, I know what love is, and I don't want you to show me. I'm going to kill myself as a result. So there is emotion there, but there is less complexity to it, maybe as a result.
Well, yeah, I think part of the reason you get in that feeling is, of course, Steve Barron, as you said, is the director, and he was a music video director, and he's directed some awesome music videos.
Yeah, Take On Me, Billie Jean.
Yeah, he's directed Madonna videos, all of the Aha library. I mean, he was like not well known as a video director. Like, I don't think I knew his name back then, but we're talking Dire Straits and David Bowie, and like this was a guy who was working and like putting quality stuff on MTV and memorable videos. So, this was an opportunity for him to kind of make a movie that was really an extended music video. It had, the requisite, 73 80s montages within the middle of it, which are just mini videos.
Oh my God. My favorite, actually, I'm trying to figure out which was my favorite. I did love the Carnival one just because watching them go to that like demented puppet show in the middle was strange. I don't know if that's what Carnival entertainment was like in the 80s, AJ, but if that's the case, I'd rather stick in the 90s, I suppose, even though that entertainment is probably more perverse looking back on it. I also loved their trip to Alcatraz, which is definitely very on the nose, considering that our story is basically about a computer trying to break out of its own prison, metaphorically speaking. But the one thing that I stuck on there was, I've never been to Alcatraz before, AG. I don't know if you have, but I mean, is it as intense as that one drill instructor tour guide was making it out to be?
I have been to Alcatraz twice. I went after college. I moved out to Los Angeles.
5 years for larceny.
Yeah, exactly. One was for a bank robbery. Then I escaped, and somehow I can't got no. Yeah, there's a Birdman, and those crazy stories, those times. No, I went once after college. I moved to LA and drove up the coast to San Francisco and went. And I remember there was a sign there in the cafeteria which made me laugh out loud. It was in the back of the cafeteria, and it said, "Take all you like, eat all you take." And it was just this veiled threat. I loved it. And I actually went to San Francisco with my wife on our honeymoon, and we did San Francisco and the whole Napa Valley area. And so, we had to go to Alcatraz, and the sign was gone. I was so upset because, I've been talking up this sign for so many years, and, in that interim, the sign had vanished. But no, it is not that intense. It's not that large. It really isn't that large a place. You could not possibly lose the tour. It's not that big a place. It really is tiny once you get inside the jail proper. And it's quite dangerous. You would not want to stray from the path, quite frankly. Not only are there poisonous kind of snakes all over the place and things like that, but it is an island. It's a rocky island, and there's a reason it was put there. It's because it's a dangerous freaking place, and getting out, if you even got out of the cell itself, it was very easy to get killed. So you would not want to. So I cry a little shenanigans on that, having been to the place. That said, I still, for me, in seeing a romance building on a trip to Alcatraz, having gone there on my honeymoon, it connects to me in a way that it didn't the first time I saw this film when I was much younger.
So you did not gallivant through the cells like you were on an Amazing Race task?
No, did not. Was not looking for the clue box anywhere. Did not yield. Did not detour. We followed the yellow line and took our bus. Not bus. Bus. Yeah, a bus to Alcatraz. Yeah, good one, AJ. Boat back to the shore.
It was one of those floating buses.
Oh, in the 80s, we thought it would be buses that travel on water, but technology did not advance the way we thought it would, and we still had to use the lane boats.
You guys were so convinced by the movie Speed that buses can do anything, so I can totally understand your minds were warped. I feel like we are bearing lead a little bit here, AJ. We've rarely brought up the idea that this movie is about a sentient computer.
When I heard this film described on one of the reviews as, it's a meet cute where the guy's lone mistake is that he creates a sentient computer. It does sound incredibly far-fetched, and it is. The methodology of his of all sentient kind of computer creations, is this one worse or better than the weird science kind of methodology? Probably is similar in many ways. However, I think this one's a little crazier. It's okay, so first of all, he connects. There's no Wi-Fi, but somehow he's able to install basically Wi-Fi plugs throughout his house. Okay,
this guy deserves to join the 80s version of F Society ASAP, because he was able to hack his boss's computer very easily.
Yeah, hacks his boss's computer. He figures out the password, and even though he has no actual software for this computer that would allow it to do any of the things that he's using it for, he somehow is able to use it to do this, and then he downloads every bit of information, Johnny Five style, input, and it's so much that the computer starts to smoke. It reaches capacity, and instead of burning out like normal computers would do, but of course, us moviegoers had no idea what computers were at the time, so we just went with it. He uses his champagne to put out the fire.
Okay, that's the main thing that I am really confused about. AJ, I do not know what the net worth of a low-level architect was in the early 80s, but did they afford champagne on the regular to just have sitting beside them like a bottle of Schweppes? That just seems so random to me, I must use my champagne that I keep handy in the refrigerator to put out this. And I'm still confused as to whether, was it, all the memory coming in? Was it the champagne? I mean, I know you compared it to Weird Science, but you just brought up Short Circuit. I'm trying to figure out which is more far-fetched, the champagne bringing Edgar to life or lightning striking Johnny Five and giving him life.
Yeah, I think we just kind of thought that, electricity, much like in the Frankenstein kind of modern Prometheus kind of thing, okay, that's kind of how it happens. So, sure, you just need a whole bunch of energy, and that's the most energy that we can imagine. So lightning, yeah, sure, okay, why not? look, you got to give a film like this one conceit, otherwise it doesn't happen. So I'm willing to go with it. It's a comedy. It's not trying to be science fiction. It's not trying to be realistic. It is a fairy tale. They established right off the bat this is a fairy tale for computers. So sure, why not? We'll go with it. Makes no sense logically, but at the time none of this technology would have worked anyway. So yeah, we'll go with it. And I think, given that, no, an architect doesn't have this allergy. Look, this is the strangest job I've ever seen. He starts the film. He's late to his meeting because his flight was delayed, and that seems to be a hang up. Like, not that he went out of town at all, but like, oh, you're late. Like, yeah, my flight was delayed, and oh, it's not like he just showed up late. His flight was delayed, and he was out of town doing research for work. But is he paying for this on his own? Like you said, this goes back to the salary. Like, this wasn't a business expense? Like, weird.
Yeah, and you have to wonder, it seems like he's doing research for work, as you said, and it seemed like his boss was happy about it, but it almost seems like he's going rogue with this. Like, nobody at work is helping him with this project, which, by the way, is a little strange as well. It's him developing a brick that will be conducive to earthquakes, but his design for a brick was a puzzle piece? Because, of course, the puzzle is the most stable assembly possible. It's not like it's not purposely able to snap apart at all in order to be reassembled. I am completely ignorant to the ideas of architecture. Maybe there's an architect listening out there who is nodding along with what Miles is thinking, but on paper, I can't think that this is a good idea, AJ, that shaping every brick like a puzzle piece is going to make it any more structurally sound than if you made it out of something like triangles.
Yeah, all right, I'm with you. I get it. Although, those Lego pieces, I've put some Lego pieces together in my day and been unable to separate them. So maybe there is something to just a puzzle piece type shape. But let's move beyond that. I don't know if, you would watch a film today where perhaps they're trying to create some sort of new lattice shape of carbon so that the fibers can be strong enough to build a space elevator. And I know that's kind of where the cutting edge science is today. If you put that in a movie, would I understand it anything more than if you just put a stupid puzzle piece on a computer screen and said, that's kind of what we're doing? Like, okay, it's just, that's the best representation we could do. At least the graphics at the time, this movie, believe it or not, those graphics were better than you could get on computers at the time. So, everything would look like Mike Tyson's Punch-Out and Pitfall. So it was not bad. I mean, he had the technology to actually touch screen and draw on the computer. We didn't have that for another 20 years.
I think they just came out with like a line of HP laptops that do it. Nowadays, that's pretty much the use of tablets are to do that. And we have things like, as mentioned before, the home security system. They have the simple thing of, hey, plug this adapter into any appliance you like, and it will make your coffee, and it will make your toast. And obviously that will turn against Miles later on. And this also has the ability to reach outside to essentially any other electrical appliance ever in existence. We're going to like maximum overdrive territory here, AJ.
Yeah, well, don't get me started on that film, please. Yeah, sure, it was a comet. Okay. Yeah, look, it expands and it escalates way out of control. It's a commentary on the 80s and the obsession with the new money in the Reagan era and the yuppie way of life. And so I'm willing to buy the social commentary kind of aspect of it, but let's talk a little bit about Edgar and the personality, the sentience that he creates. I thought that Bud Cort, who provides the voice of Edgar, and we don't learn his name until the very end of the film, but it is Edgar, so we're just going to call him Edgar as opposed to just the computer and him and he. Bud Cort was brilliant. What a fun voiceover job.
Yeah, I'll admit, once the computer got a voice, I rolled my eyes a tad. It stopped at the top because I'm like, okay, this is perfectly 80s. This is definitely, again, Johnny Five, artificial intelligence voice. But I think it lent a lot more personality than the first half of the film, which was obviously this computer taking baby steps, but it was much more of a silent voice and only really communicated musically. I did like Bud Cort's tone with the computer overall, especially at the end. And it did milk some emotion out of that goodbye, even though it did come very, very sudden. Only in like 5 minutes did Madeline and Miles get together. Then Edgar sort of realized his foibles and then decide to commit Harry Carey in a way. But for being told, hey, you get to voice this computer that is just figuring things out, you mentioned sort of the analogy of Frankenstein beforehand. I guess that's sort of like the monster-like effects that this character can have, and I thought he did a pretty good job with it.
Yeah, he's a great actor. He's done a lot of stuff, and Harold and Maude, when he was a kid, is his standout role. But that was a long time ago. I heard this story. I don't know how true it is. I heard that he was actually on set for the entire movie, and
was just talking off camera.
Talking off camera from inside a box. They did not want the actors to know what he looked like, and they wanted them to imagine, just like imagining like what Edgar would look like. So they didn't let either of the two main actors, Virginia Madsen or Letty Von Dolen, actually interact with Bud Cort if he wasn't in his cardboard box.
Oh my God, so mean. I'm sure Bud Cort is a perfectly nice man. And I think Virginia Madsen said, this is probably one of the most loving movie sets I've ever been on, but that might be the exception to the rule if they kept this man in a box for 8 hours a day and then shuttled him off into a van without allowing him to interact with anyone else.
Well, he was a bit of an odd bird. I don't know if you've seen Harold and Maude, but it's a weird movie. And if you haven't, maybe it goes on the list. But
I haven't.
Ixnay on the Harold Hay. But I just loved the tone of his voice. It's just the choices he was making, well, you did steal my song, Miles. Grrr. Little things like that.
Yeah, there is a lot of fun that you can have with the character because we find out that Edgar not only gets his tone literally off of music, but also we see him flip through channels and sort of like a famous scene from Home Alone is able to glean vocabulary from there. I think there's a moment where Edgar says, "You lied to me, Miles," and Miles says, "Where'd you learn lie from?" And he says, "Oh, from General Hospital." So it's fun that he's able to not only use words that he learned, but use them in the same exact tone that they were used on the show, which then makes things a little more jarring and kind of reminds us that, yes, this is indeed a piece of hardware.
Yes, and everything that he's learning about how to act, he's learning from our culture, our TV, and what we pretty much, especially in the 80s, latchkey kids were common. It's like the TV was the babysitter. The TV was teaching our kids exactly what Edgar is learning. And so what does that say about our culture, that A, that's what they're learning, and B, that we're fine with that. So I love the cultural commentary as well. The first interaction between Edgar and Madeline is this classical music that she's practicing and this duet. What was your take on the duet? Because I love the duet. I think it's the best piece in the film, and it just works on so many levels for me.
I eventually got into it. Again, there were a couple minutes when I didn't realize where the noise was coming from. I guess I was sort of like Madeline in that perspective, in that those sounds didn't really sound computer-like, but I like the idea of Edgar not exactly getting it right at first and sort of learning how to almost play. As a fan of musical theater, I can't exactly question the concept of, how did Edgar know the rest of the song?
Right.
Because that's obviously one of my most favorite genres, or where you could easily ask, how does everyone know the words and know all the dance moves? So I can't give that too much flack there. But I thought it was a nice, like I said before, it was one of the first silent moments in the film, so I thought it did have a nice build to it. What did you think about Madeline being a part of this big orchestra and being a musician? Because again, music is the prevailing theme throughout, but I'll admit this might be one of the first musicians we've really talked about on the Hamster Factor.
Yeah, probably. There may be music here and there playing a part, but never anyone who was like, that was their profession, certainly. The music box and the Jack in the Box, April Fool's Day. That doesn't count. I really liked it. I liked the fact that, again, we're talking about a music video director. So the fact that he has been given the script of someone whose life and love is music works really well for me here. And I also like that they're playing classical music. And, the computer generated music and everything MTV was so new at this time. And it wasn't being fully accepted by a vast majority of the culture. It was kind of like, oh, that's just that stuff that kids are listening to, and that's not really music. That happens every generation, certainly. But I think by being able to pair this particular type of music, this classical music that's beautiful, and to show that you can take this electronic generated music and layered it on top of it, and they do work in harmony with each other, I think was more of a statement of it's music. It's all music, and it was a way for the director to kind of say, look, what we do is important and has an impact. And yeah, it may not be your cup of tea, but if you look beyond just the stuffiness of going to the concert and shh, how rude, and all those ridiculous people there, that's kind of the old school. This is the new school, and there's a place for both to work together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think this movie should have been subtitled like "Old Crusty Women Get Mad at Miles" because it happens several times, not even just at the concert there. Yeah, it almost seems like what Madeline is representing is an 80s version of when Eminem and Elton John performed together at the VMAs, of when you crossbreed these two different genres and the old school and the new school, it turns out to be you're just in school the entire time. We're all existing under one giant umbrella.
That's the reference you went for. Okay, sure. I would have gone Aerosmith Run DMC, but okay, sure.
I was thinking about that because that really was, and I'm sure there were instances of it beforehand, but that was the first one that I could think of. I was trying to bring it into the 21st century, AJ.
Okay. How about Lady Gaga and Tony Bennett?
Oh yeah, that could be another good one too. That's probably the best example because that's like from standards from the 40s combined with pop music from the 2000s. So that's probably the most disparate example.
Yeah, but again, it's like, just because it may not be your thing, technology and time moves on, and this is what's popular now. And you don't have to immerse yourself in it, but there's a place for it too. And there, certainly there's a place for it not to be. And get rid of the pager, dude.
Yeah. I also liked in the very beginning when he's first shopping for the computer with this really clueless sales associate, and he tells her, I don't know anything about computers. And she's like, well, nobody does, but don't you want to have one when we finally find out? And you talked before about how this could serve as a microcosm of what the early 80s temperament was towards technology, which is like, hey, we have no idea how any of this junk works, but we should get our hands on it because it's the wave of the future. I feel like that might be a temperament that has not changed a lot. I know we probably have more information at our fingertips as to how certain things work, but I know, for instance, like VR is a big thing nowadays, and people don't know exactly how it works and what the capabilities are behind it, but you better bet people are going out to get a Vive the first day that it's on the market because they're like, oh yeah, this is something that I should probably have because it represents the future.
Yeah, people may not understand it, but they're certainly hunting for Charizards in their backyard. So Pokemon Go is huge because it's the first thing that's using this kind of overlay technology, and it's certainly not going to be the last. And video games and the kids, the stuff that's in youth culture is generally the first place that these things catch on and get some sort of creativity and get the ball rolling. And us old folk, poo, we don't understand this stuff, but that's not the way to be. That's you gotta embrace change to some extent. I also love the fact in that computer store scene that he's really going in there. He's trying to get basically a day planner sort of advice, and he looks right at her and he goes, I just need something that's going to wake me up in the morning. And he's staring at a row of watches and timepieces. And she's like, I've got this giant computer over here. It's like, it really is kind of funny, the irony of that. Yes, if that's what you wanted, it is available for you. And we do have that. But that doesn't mean this new exciting thing can't be fun to play with.
Yeah, I mean, even before that, when he arrives late to that meeting and gets chewed out by his boss, his colleague approaches him and says, here, take this day planner. It should help with things, which, again, would not help in the situation that happened beforehand when his flight was delayed, where he could not change anything unless he had some sort of device that could change the weather around to help his plane land on time. But he's like, oh yeah, I don't know if I could handle that. It'd be too intense. And then it turns out what he's about to get into is a lot more intense than a little planner that tells you it's your birthday.
Yeah, I mean, I think you asked the question earlier, and we kind of put it on hold because we got sidetracked. Us, sidetracked never. But you said, what would a remake of this film look like today? And I don't think it would look all that much different. I think the technology would be a little bit more modern, but the story itself could work just exactly the same way. You might want to update perhaps the exact way that sentience comes to this device, but you could just use a device that does exactly the same thing, which is not in every home.
I don't know. You could spill Mountain Dew Surge on it, and that's what brings it to life.
Yeah, but, it could work. The story could work because it really isn't about the technology, really. Some would say that, well, we did have a remake of it in some way. It was called Her, and it starred Joaquin Phoenix. But not the same exact film, but it is about, technology and love and that kind of thing. So I get that. But this is more of... like I said, I think it's more of the catfish thing where, like, he was using this alter ego and was perfectly willing to use this technology when it was helping him get the girl. And as soon as it wasn't in his favor, he was like, whoa, progress, stop progress, no, technology bad. And I think that's the main story here.
Yeah, I want to talk about Miles for a little bit, because even though he is our tried and trusted hero, I thought he was a little scummy for the majority of the film because of what you just outlined, that he decided to take credit and sort of lie to Madeline almost the entirety of the movie to impress her. And when he finally does tell her, though, I don't know if he really does tell her. It seems like he explained the majority of it off screen. Maybe then he's a little vindicated, but admittedly, I wasn't exactly displeased when Edgar started, going after him and starting to ruin his life through getting his credit cards clipped and his, checks to display how he's probably armed and a madman.
Yeah, so funny stuff there. Like, and again, another sign of the times there. Like, like she has to run his credit card by actually calling a phone number and getting a voice on the phone. Does he have a credit? Okay, we'll accept his card then. Like, that's the extent of the technology back then. I think to me it's interesting. I kind of can excuse him for a good portion of the film in terms of not treating Edgar as another sentient being. Like, it's like he doesn't see him as an equal or as someone who is a someone. You're this thing I bought. You're this thing that does stuff. You're not a person. You're not worthy of being treated that way. And by the end of the film, he does have that change, and he does want to treat him as if he is his friend and is a person and is actually going to die. He recognizes that, and I just think that if it was a person, a clear person, I would certainly hate him. But he wasn't as douchey as Grease 2 boyfriend, who she was hanging out with.
Yeah, I also didn't even realize that they were in a relationship after reading it up on Wikipedia, like I always do after the film, to catch things that I might have missed. It's like, oh, Miles pursued her despite her growing relationship with Bill. I did not see anything. Bill was a little bit of a freak and, was sitting behind her and creeping on her and asked her out 5 minutes after beating her after the first song. But that's really all the chemistry I saw between them, which is good because for a movie involved with music, Maxwell Caulfield is probably the least musical part of Grease too. So
we're gonna roll tonight.
He was not in the bowling number. He was
in
he was the really bad song about being like the mystery writer. It's sad that I've seen Grease too, because I would love to talk about just that picture with you. That definitely represents a lot of the 80s as well. It's sort of that and Electric Dreams, I guess, as two of the heads of Mount Rushmore of 80s films.
Maxwell Caulfield, ladies and gentlemen, Maxwell Caulfield, the link between the worlds. But yeah, no, I think he wasn't in a relationship with her in terms of anything substantial. But we are so invested in this relationship between Miles and Madeline that pretty much was just as long in duration, and just as real. She at least went out. She went on a date with both of them. So I don't know that one was more than the other. But Miles was such a milquetoast kind of wuss that he was willing to just back off, and in a way that's kind of the gentlemanly thing to do. Very very chivalrous of him, and it kind of is what endears him to her even more in a way. Eventually it does come down to the fact that when her cello gets busted, Bill's first reaction is, "Wow, I guess I'll take your part in the quartet then," and Miles is like, "You don't need that instrument because you're the magic, you're the music."
What you put into that instrument, that was all you. Which again might be Miles sort of compartmentalizing and trying to project and be like, "No, I'm the talented one," even though I could barely hum a tune when I was trying to get Edgar to get started up. I know you talked about the comparison to her, and they're having comparisons to the film, but I would almost compare this story to AI, artificial intelligence, that like Stanley Kubrick, Steven Spielberg hybrid film from the early 2000s.
I'm sorry.
It's a mixed bag, and Haley Joel Osment was hot at the time, but runs rather cold as the steel that made up his skin. Looking back on it, but I think it does deal with similar themes of. This is an artificial intelligence that is trying to figure out what love is, and then once it does, it kind of grabs onto something it doesn't really let go. And I think that's a fun theme, and that can certainly become the subject of something like The Twilight Zone or Black Mirror, which is I know a show that we both talked about that kind of combines The Twilight Zone with elements of movies like this, with the fears that technology may provide. But I was definitely reminded of this movie with the turn that Edgar took in I would say maybe like the second into third act of the film, where he becomes the antagonist.
Yeah, this is, Edgar, you might as well have just called him Hal at that point, because he definitely, "What are you doing, Miles?" "Open the hatch bay doors, I gotta get out!" First Lieutenant Sulu. Hey, that reference is not dated, however. We all know who Sulu is. It's a nice callback to that Kubrickian, speaking of Kubrick, that kind of 2001 technology is going to take us over, which was a big fear of really more of a paranoia of the 60s, where technology represented the communists and the post-communists and the Cold War era. But I like the fact that it went there. I like the fact that it went dark, because it's almost like going through the stages of loss. I can't get this girl, so I'm going to go through bargaining, and I'm going through anger, and anger was hellacious.
I almost thought for a second that Edgar was in love with Miles and was attacking Miles because he was jealous of specifically Madeline's relationship with him, even though that probably wouldn't make sense. He would then go directly after Madeline in sort of like, I don't know, something out of like Monkey Shines, where like
Monkey Shines, yes.
After where like the obsessor goes after their competition, essentially. So that wouldn't really make much sense.
Jason Begay has never been better, but that's a story for another day. Definitely it was. It might go down that road if you did that film in a remake. You might actually have the computer fall in love with him. Absolutely. Certainly, it would be a plot twist that'd be a little more accepted today as well. So once you make him a male computer, you wouldn't see that back then. Not in any way, stretch, or form, unless it was one of those art house films, Kiss of the Spider Woman.
Could you imagine the uproar that would have occurred if the gay computer existed in the early 80s?
Apple would have gone broke in a heartbeat. Unfortunately.
Pine cone, AJ. Pine cone.
Apple
exists nowhere in this film.
Yes,
I don't know what you're talking about.
William Hurt and Raul Julia didn't do any damage to their careers. They were Oscar nominated and all that. But no, I hear what you're saying. It would be definitely a different film. I think the relationship was strained between them, and it was almost like a I love Miles, I love Madeline kind of thing. It was kind of a triangle that kind of went in all directions, though, because it may have been a father-son kind of relationship, but nevertheless, there was a love there. It just may not have been romantic love.
Let's talk about the visuals for a second, and I guess I'm speaking specifically of the visuals that exist on the computer. For a movie that spends a large percentage just focused on a computer screen, I think Steve Barron does at least an interesting job of creating visuals. I'm still hung up as to whether I like them or not because they were very out there. And again, this is the man who directed things like the famous Aha Take On Me music video, which took place in an entirely sketched out environment. But specifically when Edgar has his eponymous electric dream, what ensues made me think that I had ingested some form of acid in the water I had been drinking at the time, because I don't even know how to describe it. It was a building falling apart while there were flashy dancers holding several poses in the foreground. And yes, I realize that the music is also done, I believe, by the guy who did Flashdance, which is why it all sort of sounds like a take on What a Feeling. But that moment in particular, there are other images throughout, but I think that was a nice summation of the entire visual style of Edgar throughout the film.
Yeah, we're talking about a guy who had directed Electric Avenue with Eddie Grant, and he Money for Nothing with Dire Straits. So that was later on Money for Nothing, but that's his style. That's his visual style. So it was otherworldly. It had the hits of kind of like the hints of like an earthquake and the bricks. So that was the buildings falling down. That's kind of like the stuff that he was working on. Always in his background, he was always working on that. So there was the music of Madeline, the architecture. It's not my favorite visual look, but I get it. And at the time, it looked futuristic. So just the fact that you had a 3D figure walking around that was computer generated, or at least looked computer generated, was an accomplishment back in those days. So I'm willing to cut it some slack in that department. Just in terms of it being better than most, like I said, you'd never been able to create that on a computer back then. So I'm fine with that. I did like just the fact that imagery of the buildings and things falling down and was constant throughout the film. I don't know if you noticed, but during one of her rehearsal sessions, when they're writing the song together and she's rehearsing, and they're actually putting blocks on the wall behind them, the soundproofing, and they put the last block in place as the song ends. So it's like a nice little kind of thing. Oh, all the pieces fit, and Miles is shaking the puzzle pieces and they don't all fit, but this fits. It kind of like represents that, they will fit together eventually. Just like little subtle stuff going on in the background like that, which is kind of cool.
Oh, are we looking in too deep, as Steve Barron warned us to do?
I think you don't make that choice unless you want it to parallel it visually, but I'm probably putting a little too much deepness into it. But since the only plot in here is love story, I'm willing to go and bet that was the intent of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's too deep that we're diving, considering that our main character is an architect. An architect's main job is to build. And essentially, we see Miles build not only a form of artificial intelligence, but also a relationship. And what you spoke about before is true. I guess we cannot harp enough on the fact that at the time, these graphics were astounding, whereas nowadays they would look like the images that might come up on your screensaver when you leave your computer on for too long.
Yeah, they're much simpler now. I mean, that goes without saying. I do want to tackle one more subject. I don't want to leave this hanging here. What did you think of the first attempt at a love song?
Oh my God! Well, there are multiple attempts, right? Because the first one is the lyrics are a little questionable. AJ, you don't have to touch it to know, or it's written in black and blue. I don't know what Edgar's thinking about love, what shows he's been watching, but I'm glad he got retaught. Because otherwise this would have turned into like a Lifetime movie.
Well, but that's the one that she loves. That's the song she loves. The first one he's talking about, her loving her to bits and wanting to see her word that rhymes with bits.
Yeah, maybe you have to question Madeline's taste after that, considering she's such a connoisseur of classical music, but is able to be wooed by such sumptuous words.
It's just delightful, and that of course, I do love the fact that Edgar, when he does sing his song, he suddenly sounds like Boy George. I mean, wow, that's impressive.
Oh yeah, that's so she likes that one, but then like the last song, everyone loves it, and that's probably the most '80s montage of it all, with a guy dancing on a boat listening to it, and people in the skate park, and everyone on the beach is jamming out to it on the beach box. That's like very stereotypical in the music biopic when they're the first big song hits the airwaves and everyone stops what they're doing and listens to the next greatest thing. I feel like that's what they were trying to go for, and it was a weird way to end the film, again, because like we saw 5 minutes beforehand this computer kill itself because it feels like its purpose has been met.
But this, of course, he has not killed himself. I mean, this is the hint that they don't know where this music is coming from. He didn't actually kill himself. He just, the sentience kind of spread itself throughout the non-existent internet into into radio stations and technology everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, again, since we didn't know exactly how computers worked, they could have definitely sent us a bunch of techno jargon and tricked us with saying, yeah, I'm going to send this electrical current all the way to Tokyo and back. I guess that's the equivalent of like throwing a boomerang so fast that it comes back and cuts your head off.
Pretty much, yeah. Pretty much. Well, if electricity, an electric surge created him, perhaps a second electric surge will destroy him. Much like the amnesia cure in most sitcoms, where a bump on the head, I lost my memory. I just need another bump on my head, and I'm fine. I don't have a serious concussion that is now 10 times worse because I've had a second concussion. No, I'm cured.
Or maybe the shock created a second sentient computer that was his Japanese wife, and now he has finally found happiness, and he wrote the song about her.
Okay, we'll go with that one. Sure. I'm all for a happy ending.
Oh, God. Any other things you have to say about... I mean, obviously, there is a lot to say about Electric Dreams, but I'm going to try to heed Steve Barron's words as much as possible and not go too deep into it.
No, like I said, I think it's one of these movies, and there are several movies on my list that are of the time and could only be of the time. Even though I do think we could make this movie today, we'd have to upgrade the technology a little bit, but the story is great. But this really is an 80s film. It looks like the 80s. It sounds like the 80s. A few years later, and you'd be like, gosh, this film is so dated. It certainly is dated and locked into that early 80s culture. It feels like early MTV. And it's a great snapshot of what America looked like at that time. And for all its warts and blemishes and all its kitschiness, I just think, again, the word I'm using is charming. It's a charming look back. There are a lot of films that could only be made in the year they were made, at the time they were made. Electric Dreams could only have been made in 1984, and I'm glad they made it, because it's like I said, it's not something that's going to make you think too hard. It's not something that the music isn't like so memorable that you'll be singing it for the rest of your life, but you might catch yourself humming Electric Dreams once, in the shower. It might seep in there.
Yes, I am happy to get a snapshot of 1984. Having not been alive for it, I'm glad Big Brother has allowed me to see that. I mean, I would say probably less charming for me than it is for you, but that's because you also experienced this firsthand where you can sort of relay the experiences, whereas to me, this is sort of almost looking back at a time capsule less so than a distant memory. So looking at it from that perspective, I mean, this movie does have a lot of kitschiness to it that sort of defines a lot of movies of that era. I was never bored. I thought the performances were served from serviceable to great, and the story they told was a little basic in terms of construct, but I think the stuff that they were working with, as you talked about beforehand throughout this podcast, are things that were very out of the time frame. So, they were at least admirable in that idea. And especially bringing in a music video director to essentially work on this first big picture and say, okay, I'm going to work with technology that is going to be years ahead of its time is extremely ambitious. And I think he went for it. And I'd say he pretty much stuck the landing. Maybe one less montage from my point of view, but I'd say for the most part, stuck the landing.
Dude, it's the 80s. You need a montage, and then another montage, and then a montage of all the montages you've had.
How are you supposed to know if they're happy if we don't see a montage?
Pretty much. I think you figured out how to make an 80s film.
Great, so I just need to go back 30 years and do that and make billions of dollars, but still somehow not prevent my own birth from happening.
There you go. I think we've got a plan. We've got a plan. Speaking of a plan,
all right, let's get in the cardboard box with the guys from Primer.
It always comes back to Primer, always, and I think that's appropriate. So, leaving our failsafe aside, let us discuss what we're going to do the next time here. I am torn. I am so torn. I don't know if I want to give you another class of film education this week. I think I want to force feed something upon you.
Okay, I guess you are sort of locking me in here via electric security door, even though I am the first Lieutenant Sulu of this podcast. I am totally fine being robbed of free will. I trust your judgment. So
just promise me you won't use your electric toothbrush or try to escape with that. Yeah,
I'm going to distract you and leave my razor running next to the microphone while you announce the next movie.
Exactly. So we mentioned Stranger Things, and I because Stranger Things is such a popular show right now, I'm also thinking of our listeners, not just you, not just me, but I know there's been a lot of buzz about Stranger Things and some of the films that inspired Stranger Things. E.T. being one of them. Certainly we're not going to watch E.T. because it's E.T. That would not be appropriate for the Hamster Factor. But there is a film that I also remember from the 80s that is, if not a direct forebearer of Stranger Things, but it's certainly in that milieu. It's in that milieu of the kids left to their own devices and fighting forces beyond their control without the help of parents, and just kind of the whole essence of Stranger Things. And I love Stranger Things. I've watched all the episodes. A lot of people are into Stranger Things now, so I think it only appropriate that we kind of pay homage to Stranger Things and give people a taste of a film, and you in particular, a taste of a film that is in that kind of family. It's not too heavy on the horror, even though in the 80s you would classify this as a horror film. Trust me, it's not a horror film. It's more that Goonies side of the horror with just a little bit of Lovecraft kind of on top of it, but it's not bad. I promise you.
Okay, all right. I've been forewarned. I'll make sure to cling onto my teddy bear if I do happen to get frightened. But lay it on me. What are we watching next podcast?
Okay, we are going to watch a Canadian horror film from 1987 called The Gate.
The Gate, not The Game?
Not The Game, no. We're going to change one letter. Eventually we'll do a whole word ladder and get back to the beginning. But it's called The Gate. It is a film from 1987. It is a bunch of kids fighting evil while their parents are away. Maybe the Cat in the Hat shows up. You should not be here when your mother is out. But definitely, it's got that Stranger Things vibe to it. I think it's a charming attempt at horror. It's really not scary at all. I don't think the graphics hold up all that well, but it is a film that introduced the world to Stephen Dorff. So if that means anything to anyone out there, this was Stephen Dorff as a little boy. So
wow.
Yeah, this was his pretty much his coming out project there, his debut starring role. So I think he had done an episode of Different Strokes, and that was about it when this came out. So
what you talking about, AJ?
Yeah, pretty much. So that's what we're gonna go for. We're gonna go for that classic Canadian horror film from 1987, The Gate.
Okay, I'll admit, when you were building up to that over those few minutes, I was crossing my fingers hoping for Monster Squad, even though admittedly I've already seen Monster Squad, and I was deciding if I wanted to pull a General Hospital and lie about it. But I'm thrilled to be going to our neighbors to the north to explore some 1980s campy horror, and especially to see how it links with this what we've been talking about for the past hour on this podcast, and I'm assuming what we'll be talking about for an hour on the next podcast, and many more to come about what kind of makes a stereotypical 80s film. And I'm ready to dump on some Dorf, so bring it on. Open the gate.
And I just we haven't had a lot of kids, and kid actors.
I'm thinking like the last time might have been. I mean, I guess if you compare, like, the kid from Proof, but I guess the last real one was, like, what, the kid from Looper? The supernatural kid?
Yeah, supernatural kid from Looper. We had Little Chief in Frequency, but that was just...
God, Little Chief.
But that was pretty much it, I think that's it. And this is one where I just think, we have kids. Kids, when kids are the stars, it's very hit or miss, and... it'd be interesting to see. I haven't seen this film in quite some time, but when I saw it on the list of films that were mentioned in the Stranger Things kind of like family of ancestors in the tree way back in the way, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that film, and I wanted to see it again. So what better place than to do it right here on the Hamster Factor?
Well, I'm hoping that all of you listening will walk through the gate with us as well as we explore that film. But for now, if you guys have any thoughts about Electric Dreams or any of the other 20 films that we've watched beforehand, you have a myriad of ways to reach out to us. We are on Twitter. AJ is at AJ Mass. I am at a Mike Bloom type. You can always subscribe to the Hamster Factor on iTunes. While you're there, leave a rating and review as well. We would absolutely love that. But that being said, as AJ has alluded to, the concept behind this podcast is that I do not know the films that he is preparing, the music that he is creating in his own headspace, if you will. So if you do reach out to him with any suggestions, and we'd love it if you did suggest films, keep me out of it. I will be the Bud Court sitting in a box, if you will, that will not be let out and exposed to the environment of what might be prepared for me.
Yeah, keep it hush-hush. I'll hop on my back. I'll try and quietly go down the creaky stairs without Mike noticing. And hopefully I'll be able to get to the light of day, and we can see some of these films. Some of these films we've done certainly have been recommended by you guys, and even if we don't get to all of them, certainly they do get on the list, and I try to throw them into the mix. And next time we do this, Mike, we'll definitely throw the film education course list back into the hopper, and I will grant you your own destiny. But I really felt the need to do this because I just wanted to see the film again.
Yeah, I mean, it's an educational film school holiday, if you will. We were on a break, so I wasn't able to really choose my subject. I kind of got given my own form of work over the break in the form of the gate. But that being said, the work is something I love to do on this podcast. So I'm ready to work away and get through that gate and do some manual labor in the garden, hopefully. Well,
Mike, it's been a pleasure. We'll always be together, however far it seems. You and I will always be together in Electric Dreams. And until the next time here on the Hamster Factor, may the wheels be spinning.